Welcome to our third in a series, our speaker series, Doing More Than Nothing About Hate. We are all in this together. My name is Jody Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Dutchess County Commission on Human Rights, and I welcome you here today to join us for this important conversation, Coming Together Against Hatred, a Black, a Latinx, and a Jewish perspective, a discussion about racism and hatred, overcoming barriers, and how to collectively work together. Even since the election has been over, we at the Dutchess County Commission, and I'm sure my partners, Anati Esposito, Tyrone Wilson, who can't be here with us today, at the Ulster County Human Rights Commission and Orange County Human Rights Commission, continue to receive contacts, disturbing instances of bias and hate. Just recently, last week, I received two contacts, one with a man standing on a major road with a sign saying Jews stole the election. Another person contacted us and said that someone in a public place said to this person, you can do that with your Jew money. We continue to get contacts about incidents of Islamophobia, incidents of anti-Black racism, incidents of anti-Asian comments related to COVID-19, among others. We started this series with the intention of understanding what we can do, because that's what people are asking us. How can we come together and take action against bias and hatred? So we look forward to this conversation today, where we'll have speakers, as I mentioned, and we're very fortunate to have them today and thank them for their time, talk to us from their perspectives about some of the things that we've been discussing. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Anati Esposito, from the Orange County Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anati Esposito. I'm the Executive Director for the Orange County Human Rights Commission. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. It is really our pleasure to partner with Dutchess and Ulster, who couldn't be with us today, in this really incredible series that we've been running in the last few weeks. If you missed any one of the sessions from the series, they are available in both the Dutchess County Human Rights Commission website and in the Orange County Commission website. You will receive those links because that's also where you'll find this recording as well later on. Now more than ever, the Orange County Human Rights Commission is committed to continuing to bring resources, to bring tools, but really also to host important conversations and collaborations with the partners in our community, in collaboration with community members who are doing the work, social justice work, and really the work to end discrimination, to end hatred, to end bias, and really come together and be able to assist our communities with resources. Before I introduce our speakers and go right into our program, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. So the first thing is that we are asking everyone to please keep yourself on mute and also to keep your cameras off. During the time that we have our speakers, it really will be just the speakers highlighted on the screen to make it easier for everyone to see the speaker. So please feel free to mute yourself and also turn off your cameras. We know you're here and we appreciate you being here very, very much. We also encourage you to use the chat function for any questions that come up. So the way it will work is each speaker will have about 10 minutes to talk about the population they're here representing, talk about the work that they're doing, and answer some questions that we asked them to lead with. So they will each take turns individually speaking, and then Jody and I will come back and ask them a few questions in a panel style conversation. We have allotted some time at the end, the last 15 to 20 minutes of this entire program today, to answer your questions. So please use the chat function. We will hopefully get to all of them towards the end of the presentation, but you can punch in your questions at any point. So I'd love to introduce to you our speakers today. Our first speaker will be Suzanne Leon. Suzanne is a member of the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation of Ulster County and is also the former Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Orange County. Suzanne, we're very grateful to have you today. The second speaker will be Genesis Ramos. Genesis is a daughter of a Honduran immigrant parents and a lifetime resident of the city of Newburgh and social justice warrior. She recently obtained her master's in public administration and is currently doing healthcare management and consulting on matters of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So welcome, Genesis, as well. And finally, Lester Strong. Lester is the Executive Director of the Peaceful Guardians Project, which serves as a communication bridge between law enforcement and communities of color. Currently, Lester is the Principal Facilitator for the City of Kingston's Re-Envision Public Safety Task Force. Welcome as well, Lester. We really appreciate our esteemed panelists and the expertise and information that they'll be bringing us. And to get us started, here with us is Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Naudi and Jody, for putting together this really important panel. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Before I start talking a little bit about the incidents the anti-Semitic incidents that have been occurring in this region of Ulster, Orange, and Dutchess, I wanted to give a little context for some of the people in the audience who may not be so familiar with anti-Semitism. And I guess the first thing that I want to say is that anti-Semitism is not new. It has been around for millennium, for thousands of years. And over the course of its history, it's taken on different dimensions, some ethnic, some religious, and racial as well. Prior to 2016, anti-Semitism was not really at the forefront of the American Jewish community. I recall actually going to a major conference of the Federation in 2016, and I was very surprised that there wasn't a single panel that discussed anti-Semitism and security issues in the community. Anti-Semitism was mostly seen, I think, as an Israeli connected to anti-Israel sentiment, and that many American Jews felt had distanced themselves necessarily from it. I think that in general, the American Jewish community felt relatively safe and secure living their lives here in the United States. But unfortunately, as anti-Semitism swept across Eastern Europe and then Western Europe, it landed right here in the United States. And what we're experiencing here in the Hudson Valley mirrors trends and things that are going on across the entire country. So over the course of the past 4 years, since 2016, there has been a steady and significant increase in anti-Semitic incidents across the United States. And I encourage everyone who's interested to know that the ADL has been, the Anti-Defamation League has been tracking that, and they have a lot of statistics. Last year, the FBI reported that 63% of the religious motivated hate crimes in the United States were anti-Semitic in nature. And so, relative to the population, this is definitely something that is alarming. I want to distinguish, though, that in the Hudson Valley, and particularly in these 3 counties, that the demographics are very, very different. And the socioeconomics also vary widely. So I think that also plays into how anti-Semitism manifests itself as well. So I'd like to talk about the areas and give some specific incidents and types of anti-Semitic incidents that I am personally aware of over the past few years. So mostly what we're seeing is is these incidents are happening with young people. They're happening in school settings. And some examples are, finding, walking into your classroom and seeing swastikas, penciled into, or marking the desks in a classroom. Waking up and on a Sunday and seeing that someone hacked into a school district listserv and put anti-Semitic and Nazi propaganda, posted Nazi propaganda to the listserv. There's all sorts of things that happen within school contexts. A colleague described a conversation he had with his son, which involved his son telling him that, oh yes, I've been fearful all through high school. I joined the football team because I wanted, the protection of being, within, a school, an athletic team. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes on here that is totally under the radar. And, schools are they're also incentivized to keep these sorts of incidents like under the radar because they might have to report them to the state education department and be penalized for it. So there's a lot that's going on in the schools. And so education is absolutely critical. And Holocaust education in particular, and tolerance education, and we can talk more about that later. There's also, crazy things going on in employment settings. I spoke to someone who had discovered some, Nazi symbolism and in a workplace setting, and had reported it to his supervisors and HR department, and in turn, their response was to fire this person. So, I mean, also in employment settings, you can also have a variety of different manifestations where people are not really, they don't want, people in management positions don't want to really acknowledge that these things are happening and want to tamp down on them. Of course, some of you, especially those who are connected to Orange County, will remember the cemetery desecration in Florida, New York in 2016, which seriously shocked the entire nation. For me, I had just come aboard at the Jewish Federation of Orange County, just several months into coming aboard. And this was a huge wake-up call to the American Jewish community that something was wrong. Something was very wrong. We were no longer really feeling safe in our communities, that we needed to be vigilant about anti-Semitism here in the United States. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there has been a lot of public organization and resistance in Orange County to the Haredi community, which is the ultra-religious communities that have settled in Orange County and that, are looking to expand their footprint in Orange County, and that there is a lot of tension in Orange County around that. So I wanted to also mention that as well. And I'm just looking at my notes. I guess there's what I want people to understand on this call is that anti-Semitism is real, and it's also very scary. And I don't, in my entire life, I have never felt unsafe as a Jewish person here in the United States. And I have to say that, it has been a big wake-up call. And, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but the Jewish community, thank God for the Jewish federations, and they have really mobilized to educate the community and to provide additional security for people so that they are safe. And I just want to end on the note that, anti-Semitism, when anti-Semitism appears in any society, it is a major warning sign. It is a warning sign that should be taken very, very seriously, that something is wrong in the society, and it's a threat to American society, to civil society and democracy. And so I want people to understand that we're on notice. We're all on notice, and we have a lot of healing that needs to happen in order for us to get our country back on track.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next up, Genesis is next. I just wanted to say the questions that our speakers are talking about right now are: what does hatred and bias look like in your community? What do you want people to know about hatred and bias in your community? And what work needs to be done within your community first before unity amongst the other communities can happen? So I'll turn it over to Genesis.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. So I am here representing the Latinx community. I am first generation. So I was born here, but my parents migrated here from Honduras in the late 80s. So that in and of itself affords me a very different meaning as to what it means to me and what it's like to be a Latina, and how I've come to understand hate as it relates to how Latinos and Latinas experience hate in our own communities, in this county, and in this nation, really. I think, first off, really starting. And when I was thinking about what does hatred and bias look like within the Latino and Latina community, my mind automatically went to stereotypes and how dangerous and damaging stereotypes can be to any community. And within the Latino community, we often hear things like Latinos and Latinas being referred to as illegal. This is language matters, right? And that's something that I've learned in so many different regards. But language really matters, and it can really make or break situations. And so when you are placing the connotation of calling someone illegal, you're basically dehumanizing that person. And so for me, that's one of the first things that came to mind, right? Definitely growing up, knowing and understanding I'm Honduran, going to Honduras since I was a child, but a lot of times people didn't know what Honduras was. And so there's this, and it still happens even today, right? Where if you're Latino or Latina, you're automatically Puerto Rican or Mexican. And there's so much more to Latin America than Puerto Rico or Mexico. And this goes back into biases and just those stereotypes, right? That often tends to put all Latinos and Latinas under one umbrella. And I think this feeds into issues both internally within the Latino community and externally within the Latino community. Latinos really face a lot of disproportionate outcomes in a lot of ways because of bias and hatred. When I think about healthcare, my career in healthcare, seeing how Latinos are disproportionately affected in areas such as heart disease, diabetes, for example. A lot of it has to do with culture, the foods we eat, And then the disconnect between medicine in this country and medicine back in other Latin American countries. Thinking about jobs, for example, and for those individuals who are undocumented and do not have perhaps a lot of options as to where or how they can be employed, they are oftentimes taken advantage of. We see a lot of labor trafficking, especially with the migrant farm working community. We see a lot of that happening in the Hudson Valley. It's happening every day. So when you hear about human trafficking, you usually think of movies where people are being trafficked for purposes of sex trafficking. But the reality is that here in the Hudson Valley, labor trafficking is huge, and it predominantly affects the Latino community. I don't want to say that it's exclusive to the Latino community, but it really, really heavily impacts predominantly the Latino community in the Hudson Valley. And so that's something that, to me, again, just goes and ties back into how hate and bias affects the Latino community and how it shows up. Thinking about housing, for example, and thinking about individuals who may not understand that even if you are undocumented in this country, you have rights. We have individuals, I live in the city of Newburgh, I've lived here my whole life, who are subject to unfathomable living conditions because they feel that they have to settle, that they have to deal with that they don't have a right. Oftentimes they are threatened by their landlords or threatened by other people to live in these conditions. Thinking about my time doing advocacy work in actually what is now called Fearless, used to be called Safe Homes, and working predominantly with Latina clients, and some of which were undocumented, seeing how their legal status was used as a form of manipulation or abuse, right? To keep that power and control over them in that relationship. So there's so many different ways in which hate and bias show up in the Latino and Latina community. Not to mention just the everyday nuances of people who don't speak the language, right? People who don't speak the language. And we unfortunately don't live in a society that's as culturally competent or inclusive yet. I think we're making strides in certain ways, but there's still certainly so much work to be done. And thinking about myself as a child, translating or interpreting different things for my parents. That's the experience of a lot of Spanish children or Spanish speaking children who, are 5, 6, 7 years old, reading legal documents for their parents, probably having, I'm sure I probably misinformed my parents at some point, but they really had no choice. And so thinking about how the systems work against that, right? Education, and how we have young people who come from different countries all the time and come here, and it's a huge culture shock. They come into a place where they don't know anything or anyone or the language. And this can also lead to a lot of issues. So when I think about, what do I want people to know? What do I want people to know about hatred and bias? I think it really starts with understanding and moving away from this idea that Latinos are all the same. First of all, we have to recognize that there's a lot of geographical differences, which play into a lot of different cultures and ethnicity. So not all Latinos are the same. Puerto Ricans are different than Hondurans. Hondurans are different than Colombians. Colombians are different than Mexicans. There's different customs and traditions and cultures, religion. There's a large Catholicism presence, but there's also a lot of Christianity in Latin American countries and other forms of spirituality. And these also add to some differences within the Latino and Latina community. When I think about those examples, it's really important to understand that not only should we not be placed under an umbrella, but for those individuals perhaps who may not be documented or may not speak the language, one thing I've learned is that it really helps when people feel a sense of community. And so if you have the ability to teach someone something or make someone's life just a little bit easier, to teach them, how to fill out a job application, to tell them that they have rights, even if they may be, undocumented. These are things that make the world of difference, really. A lot of times there's a big distrust in government because, of course, there's fears of deportation. And then for Latinos and Latinas who are documented and do have a legal status here and have the ability to navigate this world in the ways in which we are, supposed to be able to navigate the world, if you will. I think a lot of us, and I speak for myself, and I will just say that I'm speaking from my perspective. I am in no way, claiming to be the representative of all Latinos or all Latinas. But when I think about my experience as a first generation daughter of immigrants, you oftentimes find yourself being a pioneer. You find yourself being a pioneer in a lot of ways, and you find yourself paving the way for a lot. And that includes not only within your family, but in your community or in your surroundings. And so when I think about, what has to happen within, because when we talk about hatred and we talk about issues and points of contention between one community versus another, we have to first acknowledge within, right? And that's from an individual level, but talking about a community level and a community like the Latino and Latina community, we really have to look at within. And I'll use a perfect example. During this recent election, there was a lot of frustration over Latinos that voted for Trump. And that in and of itself, right, as ironic as it may seem for so many people, and as frustrating as it may have been for so many people, we have to understand why, because there's always a why behind everything. And so going back to what I was saying, there's a lot of geographical difference. Not every country is the same or has the same traditions, the same politics. Politics play a huge role, and the politics differ in every single country. Skin color, colorism is very real in the Latino and Latina community. It's very, very real. It's both external and internal. And I'll say that because sometimes going back to that bias and stereotype, I have a friend who is Honduran, but she is Black. And so oftentimes she's been challenged about being able to be Latina or identify as Latina because she's Black. And so this feeds into, this whole thing of you're too Black for this, or you're too light or white for this. And colorism is real. Things like having good hair versus bad hair are very real in the Latin culture. And other things, there's a lot of other factors, assimilation, for example, right? This pressure to need to Americanize, to need to lose your accent, to need to learn this language, to need to learn this complete new way of living can really do away with everything that you may have known if you were born in another country. Going back to politics, what were the politics like in the country that you come from? That's going to ultimately fit into your political views. And then thinking about generational impact, I think that's something that's not really considered often, right? So if someone, an immigrant themselves, are they first generation? Are they second generation or third generation? I think as we factor in things like generational impact, we start realizing and understanding that some things become unfortunately far removed, which is why it's so important to keep our culture alive. And I think that when I think of what does the Latino community need to do internally before looking to foster some bridges externally, we need to look within, and we need to consider these differences amongst the other countries and other people, because the reality is these differences exist, but it doesn't have to be a thing where, this country is located here or has this form of politics or predominantly practices this form of religion, so we're different than them. It should be more about looking at where we can find common ground. That's really, big in terms of how can we look internally first to be able to then move the needle externally. So I will leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all that wonderful information, Genesis. Next up, we'll be hearing from Lester.
Thank you, Naudi.
You're very welcome. Lester, don't forget to
Can
turn
you
on
see
your
me?
camera.
You can't see me yet.
No.
There I am. There I am. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to be with you. And I have to admit that I am a little speechless listening to Suzanne and to Genesis. That I thought their really compelling vision of what's going on in our community and how to address it is a huge challenge. I guess I want to start with hatred and bias, because I think that in order to make any progress, we really have to understand what are kind of the underlying causes and motivation behind hatred and bias. First of all, with hatred, my experience is that hatred is really driven by fear. Fear and a sense of lack. What do I mean by that? I mean that we feel threatened. If you listen to Suzanne and Genesis's point, it was generally that people, if I'm being really straight, white people are threatened in some way by how we show up in our communities, whether it's about their taking people of color or different religious backgrounds taking our jobs, or threatening the culture and convention that we think is the American culture and convention. So it's really about how can we control the world that we want to create and that we want to live in. And as a result of that, they otherize people who are different. Otherize meaning making them different from themselves. And in otherizing them, what they do is to demonize them, to say they're not like us. And because they're not like us, that we don't have to give them the same kind of rights, privileges, and respect that we feel that we're entitled to. So they create this separation between people who are different from themselves, whether it be color or religion or any other thing like that. So that's the fear, is that somehow you're going to infect our way of life in a way that we don't want you to change. So, and then the whole issue of bias is, it's not people hollering and screaming at us or even painting swastikas on desks. What it is generally is really about neglect and indifference. It's really about not worrying about the welfare of those who are different from us. And we see this in so many ways. We see it in education, we see it in substandard housing and segregated housing. We see it in poor healthcare, and on and on and on. And the sad truth is that they don't have to be angry because it is so endemic in our institutional systems that level of discrimination and racism is really just part of the way of doing business, unfortunately. So it just is there. But as a result, our communities are suffering, and suffering greatly. So the hard truth, in my simple view, is that there really is not a Black problem, or a Latino or Latina problem, or a Jewish problem. What we have essentially is a white problem, because white people, by and large, really hold the power and agency in our country. And as a result, they really are driving our ability to access the rights and privileges that we as American citizens, or frankly, as human beings, are entitled to. So unless and until a critical mass of whites really begin to understand that they have to stand up for equity and justice and compassion, then I think the patterns that we have seen for the past 400 years will continue. Now, the question is, am I being anti-white here? I don't think so. What I am saying, certainly there are incredible white people who have worked all of their lives to raise the consciousness and the well-being of people of color and different religions and different ethnicities in this country. No question about it. But if we're talking about what is the critical mass of whites in this country and where is their point of emphasis and point of energy, then I think we have to objectively acknowledge that that they're not there yet. And as a result, they continue to say to us, why aren't you doing more? When they don't really fully understand that it is really more within their control and their power than it is for us. Now, so what is it that we need to do in this system of unconscious and conscious bias and racism that exists in our country? Well, first and foremost, we have to stop buying into it. We have to stop allowing other people, frankly, of any color, allowing other people to assess our value, to tell us what our value is, whether we are an immigrant or an illegal immigrant or a Black person or a Jewish person. We have to stop allowing other people to tell us who and what we are. That's number one, because you understand that they are looking through a distorted lens. They're looking through a lens of, I don't want you to disturb my comfort. And we live in a society of limited resources. So if you get something, that means I'm not going to get it. So understand the distorted lens that they're looking through, and don't allow yourself to take those things personally. Secondly, it is to join in our communities with people of common interest and common goodwill, who want the best for our communities, who want to uplift our communities in a positive and expansive way. And we have wonderful examples here in Estill County of that. We have, for example, My Kingston Kids. We have the Center for Creative Education. We have Black libraries. We have any number of individuals, Harambe, who have really sought to improve the quality of life for people within our community. So we need to not only celebrate those organizations, but we need to support them. Second, and another one I would say is RUPCO, that is looking to build better low-income housing in this community so that everyone can have a decent place to live. So that's another thing that we can do. The other thing is vote, by God, vote. You know, one of the questions that we're talking about is, how do we hold our elected officials accountable? It's by voting. I mean, look what happened in Georgia. It is because of Black people in Georgia that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were able to win that state for the first time in over 30 years. And with further organization, may be responsible for changing the nature of the US Senate, which will clearly have an impact on us, because what it will do is give us the ability to work with someone who actually knows, understands, and cares about who and what we are. And on a local level, that's equally as imperative. Yes, we want to demand that our police do this and our mayor does that and our common council does it. But you know what? The strongest tool that we have is voting. And by God, we should get every man, woman, and child who is of voting age out to vote as a block to really begin to move a proper agenda forward. And the third thing that I would recommend that we do is something in South Africa that is called Ubuntu. Ubuntu. And Ubuntu means my humanity is tied to your humanity. That I can only succeed to the degree and to the extent that you succeed, because that's what it means to be human. And sadly, our white brothers and sisters, too few of them really understand this dynamic, really don't understand and appreciate the interdependency and the interconnection that we have as a society, that we're all swimming in the same pool. And if you pollute it, you're polluting it for all of us. So we need to practice Ubuntu. I was a reporter some years ago, and I covered an anti-apartheid rally in Canada with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And as passionately as he was about throwing off the shackles of the apartheid system, he was equally as passionate about throwing off the shackles of the white president, P.W. Botha of South Africa. He said, I'm just as accountable to him. I want him to be just as free as I want all of Black South Africa to be free. That is Ubuntu, a recognition that each of us is tied to each other. And unless and until we all thrive together, as Ben Franklin said, we'll rise together or we'll all die together as fools. So those would be the three recommendations that I would recommend in our community. Honoring the beauty and integrity of each individual, work as a community to make our communities better, and to love and respect one another in the spirit of Ubuntu. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Lester, and thank you to Genesis and to Suzanne for very powerful testimonies today. We are going to move into our panel discussion now, where we'll ask the panelists, they can turn on their cameras. And Audi and I have a few different questions, and anyone can answer the questions that we're going to pose to you. So the first question for our panelists is, how does the hate that you talked about and bias intersect with other types of hate and bias?
I can happy to jump in. I think that, as I was saying, I think that at its core, it's all really the same. Whether it's a bias against someone's color, as Genesis was talking about, or whether it's a bias because of somebody's religion. The underlying principle behind hatred and bias is that you are threatening my way of life, my view of the world. And as long as you are threatening that, I'm going to diminish your ability to do that. So I think that hate at its core is really the same. It's simply directed in different ways.
Yeah, and I would just want to add that I think fear is, it's colorblind, just in the same spirit of what Lester is saying. So at the core of hate is fear. And, it has no color, it has no religion. So I think that's really important to stress.
I also think it's important to understand where our biases come from and that we all have them. No one is exclusive of having biases. But I always say, as it relates to biases, we have to think about how they show up for us and really becoming aware of them so that we can hold ourselves accountable.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another question that we wanted to pose to really add to the conversation that the three of you have started. Lester, you gave us an excellent, really succinct 3 points and recommendations. Was there anything else any of you wanted to share as to what can be done to promote greater understanding and cooperation among these groups in our community? Is there something you want to add to how we can work together? And then the second part of that is, are there any challenges that get in the way of us in working together that you want to bring up?
Yeah, so this is a very important question. I'll take a stab at it. So I think that for me, when I think of how do we diminish these barriers and actually come together, first off, I think we have to start with being more open to hearing the other side. Something that has been becoming so prominent in this time is cancel culture. I have such a big problem with cancel culture because cancel culture basically says people are not allowed to be human. They're not allowed to make mistakes. I know that I personally did not know everything I know now. And there are still so many things that I don't know that I will continue to learn and grow into knowing. And so I think that we are moving away from being able to have uncomfortable conversations. We're moving away from being able to have conversations that, yeah, they may be uncomfortable, but they're necessary conversations. And the minute that someone says something we don't like, it's like, oh, this person's canceled. I think we have to give people a little more grace nowadays. I mean, there are certainly exceptions. Like if someone is being flat out racist, sexist, I mean, those things are non-negotiable. We're not talking about those kinds of instances. We're talking about situations where someone may, come off a certain way that may just be from a misinformed place, because again, we all have biases. But I have found in those instances that when I call people in and have side conversations with them, where I take my time to actually try to explain to them why this is wrong or came off wrong, as opposed to calling them out, because calling people out usually then implicates a reaction. And then that's when we get into all kinds of other issues. So for me, I think it's very important for us to start looking at how problematic cancel culture is, and then also thinking about the ways that we can call people in as opposed to calling them out.
I would like to just add that I think it's really important for us to have respect for each other's historical narratives and understand that each of the groups have their own history and history of trauma, and to be able to really see each other, to be present for each other and witness what each other's history is. And I think that helps to really humanize and bring, compassion, develop compassion and empathy for each other. So I think that that's incredibly important for healing.
There's an anti-racism class that I teach, and we say at the outset that it's not that we're trying to get everybody to come to agreement on what's being said. What we are trying to do is to allow everyone to be able to offer what is real and true for them. And in acknowledging and respecting that difference, that's really what we're coming together to do, to learn from one another. And there are what we call the 4 gateways of speech that everyone agrees to participate in. And those four gateways are: number one, is what I'm saying true, or is it just my opinion? So is it factual, or is it simply something that I think and believe? That's number one. Number two, is it kind? In other words, are we looking at the issue, or are we looking at trying to blame and shame somebody? Because if it's about blaming and shaming, then it gets us nowhere. Number three is it timely? In other words, am I saying it at a time and in a way that people can hear what's being said? For example, you don't talk over people, because all you're doing is creating this cacophony that nobody can hear. And finally, is it beneficial? What am I saying? First of all, why am I saying it? How is this going to help make the situation better or clearer? And if it isn't going to do any of that, then why am I saying it? And if it's an ego trip for me, then it's better that I don't say it at all.
Thank you. I want to add that I love the responses you all brought forward, because it reminds me of what I like to say, and that is practice kindness with one another. And sometimes that can be challenging, and this work is exhausting when you've been doing it for years, for decades. But to remind ourselves that we need to practice kindness and meet people where they are, and understand that not everyone has the same understanding that we have, or even the same experience. So definitely practicing kindness when we're met with someone who doesn't get it, or who isn't woke, or who is really genuinely trying to learn is so important. So thank you all.
So what do you think that elected officials, law enforcement, and those who are charged with public safety need to know about bias and hate? What do you think they need to be doing, thinking about, considering, and showing?
I think there's so much, right? I mean, this question could pose an entire panel in and of itself. But I think that elected officials, law enforcement, definitely need to keep in mind their biases, especially when, for example, with law enforcement, when there are individuals who are working in communities that they may not be familiar with or may not have grown up in. And so there is a level of cultural competency that may not be there. And so, really keeping in mind that, again, going back to what I said before, yes, we all have biases, but understanding how those biases are showing up into how you do your work, which leads into all these conversations that we have about, police reform and defunding the police and all these other things, because communities of color are really tired of these biases and how they've shown up and how they've resulted into a lot of the issues that we see now. And for our elected officials, it's important for elected officials to actually represent the people that they're elected to represent. It's not enough that just during campaigning that you're out, getting signatures and trying to get people to buy into you. It's really important that as elected officials are voting for or against matters, that they understand how those votes are actually going to impact their constituency. And I'm going to take something that Lester said a little bit further. Lester was talking about the importance of voting, and I wholeheartedly agree on the importance of voting. But I also would encourage and add to that for us people of color to become the elected officials that we're looking for, especially those who have an understanding of the system, because we need representation, but proper representation in the right places.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. I would, I've been working with the police department. And one of the things that has been made clear to me through that engagement is unconscious bias, and how rampant unconscious bias really is. There was a study done in the 40s and 50s that was called the baby doll test. Maybe some of you have seen it, but it's where children from ages 2 to 7 are asked to pick their preference of baby dolls, and they're white and black dolls. And children, and by the way, it was also redone in 2015. So it wasn't just the 40s and 50s, but it's also done in 2015. And what they found was 60 to 75% of the children preferred the white doll. They thought the white doll was prettier, was smarter, was nicer, and that the darker dolls were scarier, uglier, meaner, stupider. So what that research tells us is that at a very, very, very young age, we are inculcated to believe that white is better than black. So when you're asking police officers to really enforce equally, the rules and regulations of our city, it's almost impossible without them being conscious of what they're doing. So as a result, one of the things that we are recommending is that not just one time unconscious bias training, but it has to happen regularly, yearly, so that we are constantly reminding ourselves of that unconscious bias.
I'd like to also just add that, these people are being paid with tax-paying dollars, and, they work for us, they work for the people. And I think that there has to be an accountability there. For the Jewish community, we're fortunate because we do have the federations that are at the forefront of these conversations. And when I was in Orange County, in dealing with this particular incident of the cemetery desecration, I had to interact with, and on a regular basis, with the New York State Police and some local police as well. And so, it's really important for us, and local sheriff's departments. So I think it's really important to have these types of relationships, and conversations on an ongoing basis. So then when something does come up, you already have a line of communication so that you can start to address issues. The other thing is that, police training is incredibly important, and bias and sensitivity training. And this has been going on for quite some time in various areas, but we still need a lot of training and sensitivity training.
Thank you so much, all of you. So I want to take this opportunity. We have one more question for the panel, but I want to remind all our participants to please enter your questions into the chat box. I've got a few already that I've been jotting down, but this is the opportunity for you to ask the panelists questions as well. So our final question from Jody and myself to you is, I want to kind of have a chance for you three to celebrate the work that is being done and the work that you are all involved with, or the work that you see in your community. So I was wondering if you'd share a little bit of something that you see that is being done that's working, whether you're a part of it or whether you're witnessing it, because we'd love our participants to hear a little bit about it.
Great, I'll start. So I think the city of Newburgh has definitely, not just recently, right? Because there's a lot of amazing community activists and organizers in the community who have long dedicated themselves to all levels of different aspects of human rights work and social justice work. But what I did see to be different this year was a much larger sense of community amongst activists and organizers. I myself, over the summer, organized a few protests and rallies and attended others, and had pretty significant outcome. it's not even about the numbers, right? It's about the fact that people from all walks of life showed up. People from all different backgrounds showed up. So it just spoke to the ability that we have to come together. And recently, I embarked on a contract with the city of Newburgh to do consulting on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for city government. So I was able to do a really deep dive into a lot of the systemic issues within the city of Newburgh, more specifically within its workforce and different departments, and how that ultimately impacts not just the workforce, but then the community. So this was the first step in this work for the city of Newburgh. I was able to assist them with strategic planning so that they could really map out the future of this work for the long run. And I know that there are many nonprofits in the city of Newburgh that dedicate themselves to different aspects of work. We have organizations like Fearless, Recap, Safe Harbors of the Hudson, Nobody Leaves Mid Hudson, all working, Habitat for Humanity, working on different aspects of social justice. And I think that, we have, can't forget about Community Voices Heard. We have a lot of committees. I personally sit on the Economic Development Committee for the City of Newburgh, as well as the Human Rights Commission for the City of Newburgh. And these are all intersectional, right? Economic development and human rights all tie into socioeconomics and social justice. And so on different levels, I mean, from the grassroots to the organizational to the government, I'm able to see how the city is working to address some of these issues.
Suzanne or Lester, is there anything you want to share?
Sure. I would give a shout out to Ulster County for the restorative justice work that it's been doing over the past couple of years. I think it really is much of what we've been talking about here in terms of bridge building, communication, and mutual understanding. I really want to acknowledge that. Second, I want to acknowledge the work that the City of Kingston police reform task force is doing, as well as the police commission, law enforcement commission at the county level, that really is getting into the guts of what should good and proper law enforcement really look like. So I'm really happy about that. And the final thing that I'd mention is RUPCO, that really is looking at creating decent housing for low-income families in the Hudson Valley, where the housing stock is shrinking, housing prices are becoming, and rents are becoming more and more expensive, and that RUPCO is really looking for ways to begin to make decent and affordable housing accessible to many, many more people. So I want to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you.
And I guess I'd like to just add that as far as the Jewish community is concerned, I think it's really wonderful that there are so many people. The Jewish community is incredibly diverse, but this specific issue has really rallied so many different types of people, and so it's really had the impact of unifying the American Jewish community, and it in some way. And also, I just want to give a big shout out to the Jewish federations, both in Orange County and in Ulster County, that I'm very familiar with, because of the work that they're doing in the schools in terms of education, with the schools, of working with the superintendents of schools to increase tolerance education, and just all the public awareness that they're doing, having public lectures, talking about the issue, and as well as, being a really, they're also, arms are open to other people of faith and other members of minorities in our communities to have a conversation, to get to know each other better, so that we can, unite together in the face of this, prejudice and hatred.
Thank you. We really appreciate the different perspectives that you're bringing to how we come together across communities to address hate and bias. And so we've been talking quite a bit about police and policing and what's been happening in the different communities. I'll just say also in Dutchess County, we've also had a police reform collaboration that just released a report yesterday. Training is one of the pieces of that, not the only piece, of course, but training, implicit bias training and things of that nature. So, and we heard earlier about the need for implicit bias training and education and being aware of our biases, because without that, right, it's very difficult to make that movement and growth. So we do have some questions from our attendees today. And Addie, do you want to start off?
Yes, absolutely. So the first question we have is, how can folks handle conversations with people who seem to be stuck on hate? Any one of you can jump in and give us some suggestions. It's not an easy one, that's for
well,
sure.
This may not be a very popular response, but my general approach is that I don't waste my time with them, because if they come from a position of hate, then there's nothing that I can say that is going to change their demeanor. If they want to talk to me about issues and feelings that they have, and they want to have a conversation about that, then I'm perfectly happy to do that, no matter how strident their position might be or how opposite it might be from mine. But if all you want to do is to feed your hate, I'm not going to help you. That's all on you. So that's generally my attitude.
Lester, actually, that's one of the approaches that I take on self-care for people in this work. I've tried. The last one I remember was 48 minutes long, and 48 minutes into it, I realized, what am I doing? Why am I giving this person 48 minutes of my energy? I questioned myself, why do I think I owe them that? And it wasn't until, again, 48 minutes into it that I realized, oh, this person isn't looking to grow. They're not looking to actually engage in a conversation. They're looking to prove me wrong or fight me on something, So I don't disagree with you. I think it's sometimes about picking and choosing your battles, following your gut when you know someone is really not looking for. And that's why earlier when I talked about practicing kindness, I don't know if you caught it, but I said when someone is genuinely looking for having a conversation, ignorance comes in many ways, but some people really do want to know more. And those are the ones that I definitely welcome.
And I would just, my little add to that, Naudi, because I think we're all both on the same page, is that sometimes the most kind thing that you can do is walk away.
Yes.
Rather than enter into this huge, battle of wills. Sometimes it's better to just walk away.
Which is also why I don't engage in social media fights, conversations, trolling. That's just not.
I think that the bottom line here is that you're not going to change everyone. And sometimes you can't change anyone's mind, and it's really not your responsibility to do so. I find it to be very emotionally taxing and a lot of emotional labor to have to explain half these things anyways. So, if it's someone who I know is genuinely wanting to hear, that's fine. But it's also okay to not have these conversations, right? Like it's okay, because in the end, it is not your responsibility to educate or inform people. I think if you have the ability to do it, great. But I think there's this misconception sometimes that people of color or, you know, people of like non-dominant groups have this, are often looked at to speak on certain matters. But the bottom line is it really isn't our responsibility to always have to do that. It's very emotionally exhausting.
Definitely, thank you. Jody?
Okay, so another question, what specific actions can people who are not affiliated with an agency take to get involved and address hate?
I think this is such a good question because I find that oftentimes, and this just has to do with the world we live in that can often be classist. You know, sometimes people feel that if they don't have a title, quote unquote, or some sort of role, that their efforts or that their contributions are not valid. And I'm here to say not only is that false, but there's so much, but the power is in the people. And so I always encourage people and remind people that everyone has their lane. Not everyone is going to go to a rally or a march. Not everyone is going to call your local legislator or senator and, you know, or write a letter to your senator. Not everyone is going to show up to a city council meeting, and that's okay. There are ways in which you can contribute, and sometimes your own lane, if it's art, for example, if you're an artist, that may very well be your form of activism and your form of protest. I think too often we place too much emphasis on all these official roles and capacities and titles. And oftentimes, unfortunately, those roles and titles and people in those roles and titles aren't even doing what we want or expect them to do. And so oftentimes we have, basically what I'm saying is people have a lot more power than they realize. They have a lot more power to change and shift things than they realize. So I would just encourage people to find ways, and because every community is so different. And so finding ways in your own community that make sense to be active or that speak to your own interests and passions. There's always ways to be able to give back in your own lane.
Thank you.
To just add to that, I think it's important to go back to, you know, personal responsibility and reflection and introspection, because I think that, you know, within each of us, we inherited certain biases, and it's really important for each of us to have, you know, accept personal responsibility. And then I would definitely agree with what Genesis said, and, you know, find what's comfortable to you. Within the Jewish community, you can support the Jewish Federation, you can get involved. They want people to get involved. And there's also other organizations such as the ADL that are really proactive and doing phenomenal work in this area. So, but it's really, it's just such on an individual basis, but each of us has an important role to play.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
To just add before I go on to the next question, the work is already being done by community members, right? I completely agree with Genesis where there's so much emphasis on titles and agencies, et cetera. I see book clubs that are focusing on just combating hatred and learning more about it. I see, you know, and Roger Moss in this chat actually, who was also the author of this question, mentioned a chat that he is, or a Zoom call that he is hosting through the Warwick Library. So the work is happening, it is. And I know that sometimes it can feel, because even on our level where we are the agencies or the professionals or the government officials, you know, it feels like it's not enough, we need to do more. And but it's happening. And I think, you know, being kind to ourselves is also really important in the amount of work that we're doing. But, you know, spreading the word, taking, you know, self-responsibility and accountability, even at the dinner table, you know, hosting these conversations, sharing this video link when you get it at the end, all of that is so important. So let's not undervalue the work that individuals are already doing, like yourselves. So thank you. The next audience question is, what work or how much work is being done to connect cultural and social and political justice to economic and environmental justice? Can anyone speak to how we're tying this work to economic and environmental justice?
Well, I can only speak from my experience with the city of Newburgh. So I co-chair the Economic Development Committee. And the main reason why I joined the committee is not because I'm an economic development specialist or expert, but rather because my education and experience has afforded me a real understanding of socioeconomics and how socioeconomics impacts a community like Newburgh, and seeing the shift that has been happening where people have started to get displaced. I wanted to make sure that I was intentional in keeping equity at the forefront of further development. So I think that when I think about my role in the committee and what I'm able to bring forward is, in every conversation we have, it's saying, okay, but how, are the current residents that are here, are they going to be able to benefit from this? If we're like, what is it that we're actually focusing on? Because yes, we want this community to thrive, but it's also keeping in mind, that we want to develop without displacing people. So I think there's always ways to tie, and honestly, it's a very, it's not a silo, it's interconnected. So I think it's very important that when we talk about things like economic development or environmental justice, that we are keeping equity at the forefront of all these conversations.
I sit on the board of RUPCO, and we are constantly looking at the balance of making sure that the structures and that we put together and the buildings that we renovate really are healthy and environmentally safe for the people who inhabit them. So it's not, for us, it's certainly not about cutting corners for those structures. It's about ensuring that that they're safe and clean and healthy, and wherever we can use energy efficient materials, we absolutely do. So as Genesis was saying so well, we understand that those things go hand in hand.
And I think it just speaks to the whole point, which Lester brought up in the very beginning, which is that we're all interconnected, and that all of life is interconnected on the planet. We are all interconnected. We are connected to Mother Earth, and so this is something that I think we need to keep in mind and understand at all different levels of our society.
Jody, you're on mute.
Thank you. How can we attract more individual community members to attend these webinars?
I hope somebody tells me the answer to that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a big challenge. I know personally, I always share stuff on my social media. LinkedIn, if I know there are people that have specific interests, I will send it to specific people. Sometimes, for example, work does get in the way. So for example, right now, this is during the work day. So, there were some people who are like, unfortunately, I won't be able to make it. So there's that piece. And then there's, I think, just the piece of lack of understanding, right? So for someone who may be very disconnected from these kinds of conversations or this kind of work or just, this kind of dynamic, I think going a little bit further and explaining what is it about or how it can benefit them. Because, we're always thinking of like, what's in it for me, right? So I think really approaching it, that helps. But I find that it's difficult to attract the general public and community to these kinds of events. You could have the most compelling topic at hand, and you'll still have that lack of participation.
You know, I'm going to be a little more contrarian here. I don't know that more is always better. I think that what is interesting is, and important, is the quality of the exchange for the people who are here. Because my experience is that when there's a quality of conversation and communication, then friends tell friends, and it begins to grow organically because people have had such a good experience in being a part of it. So you know, if I may, I think that this has been a really fruitful kind of exchange today. And I think these are the kinds of things that will build larger and larger groups. But to Janice's point again, I don't know that we will ever get thousands of people to come and be a part of this. But if we're able to connect with hundreds, and that those hundreds then are connecting with hundreds, I think it's something to be proud of.
Yeah, I completely agree. Coming from the planning side, I can share, you know, the Orange County Human Rights Commission has hosted events in the evening. We've hosted events early morning before 9, and our attendance is always very, very similar. So I don't necessarily think it's about, you know, the time or the speakers or I think it's about who is ready and when are they ready to engage in the conversation. I've, in the last couple of years, have started to take the approach of focusing during the 9 to 5, because I find that agencies and employers are sending people almost on a mandatory basis, right? So, you know, to kind of check boxes, etc. Or employees are signing up during their work time, but using that really useful information to then help others. And I find that to be really valuable, because if employees start to value these conversations and are paying staff to show up and attend and engage, then I think we're reaching another side that we may not be considering, right? A really important side that we may not be considering. And most important, I agree, Lester. I think, you know, 1, 2, 3 people that get something out of today will take it to someone else and share, and they'll join our email list, and they will show up to the next event and the event after that. And that's how it grows. Because I do agree that it's about quality oftentimes and not quantity. But with that said, the beauty of this year with everything virtual is that all of these videos are up on our website, and people can now watch. You know, this event, for example, we had almost 200 people sign up for it and had a little bit less than half of that. But that's okay, because quite often, like I do myself, I sign up for things so that I can then watch the video when I'm able to. So people are getting the message when they're ready, when they're able to. Yeah.
So
Jody,
before we,
yeah.
So I think we're through most of our questions. We want to give our speakers the opportunity to maybe give us a last thought that you have about anything that we've talked about today, and something you'd like to leave our audience with.
Well, I think I'd like to stress the importance of education and the importance of getting to know each other better and on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we, you know, sort of demystify and humanize each other, when we can see each other as human beings and understand that we're all invested in living on this beautiful planet, in, you know, living in a country where we're all free and we have dignity and our lives are respected and we have equal opportunity, then I think we have something that we can really work. You know, that's a platform for working together for the future.
Thanks, Suzanne.
I would encourage people to be open to having uncomfortable conversations. I would also specifically to allies, remind allies to leverage your privilege in the ways that actually impact outcomes for minorities and marginalized groups, and that allyship is not performative, and that, you know, it's not just about what you post on social media or the things that you may share with your friends of color, but most importantly, what you're doing when no one is around. And I also definitely agree on the point of education and training, but I think that much further than education and training, for those individuals who have the ability to make certain decisions in organizations and agencies or to influence decision making, to understand that policy and practice is more important. Because I always say, you know, what is execution without strategy? And training is part of the equation, but it's not the solution.
Thank you.
I would just encourage us to really think carefully about the power of intention. And what I mean by that is really thinking about not how you want the world to be, but how you want to be in the world, how you want to engage with yourself and with others, and then begin to create that environment and that condition for yourself, because you cannot please, you will not please everyone. So live a life that is true and authentic and good for you, and it will radiate to those who are around you.
Thank you, Lester.
Well, this does conclude our program for today. You know, on behalf of the 3 programs, the 3 collaborations, I just want to really give a wholehearted thank you to Suzanne, to Genesis, and to Lester for sharing so much wisdom, so much information, and just sharing yourselves with us today and your presence with us today. I also want to thank all the participants. There have been really great conversations going on in the chat box. Bless you.
Sorry.
Bless you.
It happens, we're on Zoom. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, but really for being a part of this conversation and continuing the conversations, because we do know that it doesn't end here. It doesn't just, you know, disappear and go away, but really for all the ongoing work. The videos will be up so everyone can share it, can rewatch it. They will be going out to everyone who registered in the next couple of days, and then they will be available on both the Dutchess and the Orange County Human Rights Commission's web pages. Again, I know I've said this a few times, but along with all the other videos of the forums that we have hosted, you know, earlier in the year. Before Jody, I give you a second, just want to wish everyone a safe and healthy and beautiful holiday season, and really wishing you all good health. Jody?
Yes, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our attendees today, and wishing you all a safe and healthy holiday season. Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.